The history of humanity does not begin in the cradle of civilization, but in the cold, silent heights of Mount Hermon, where the first contact between the stars and the earth was officially recorded. Long before the first brick was laid in Uruk or the first pyramid rose from the sands of Giza, a group of celestial entities descended from the upper atmosphere, piercing the historical firewall of our world. These were the luminous ones, known in the ancient Sumerian records as the Teachers of Light, and in the later Forbidden Scrolls as the Watchers. They did not come as conquerors or as spiritual apparitions, but as physical administrators and technical experts tasked with monitoring the development of a newborn species. The Vatican, acting as the primary custodian of human amnesia, has spent nearly 2,000 years rebranding this technical arrival as a moral rebellion, turning a scientific mission into the legend of the fallen angels. The arrival on Mount Hermon was a calculated entry into the planetary laboratory. The cuneiform tablets of Mesopotamia describe these beings as possessing a radiance that was not of this world, a biological frequency so high that it appeared as light to the primitive human interface. They brought with them the tools of civilization, the mathematics of the stars, the chemistry of the earth, and the resonance of the soul. For the early humans who witnessed their descent, the Watchers were the physical manifestation of the divine, teachers who walked among men and spoke a language that harmonized with the very fabric of reality. However, the early church councils recognized that a history of physical contact with advanced extraterrestrial mentors was a terminal threat to their doctrine of a distant and singular deity. They needed to turn these physical teachers into spiritual traders to maintain their monopoly on the heavens. Inside the restricted sections of the Vatican secret archives, there are manuscripts that predate the Book of Genesis, providing a clinical account of the Watchers' descent. These documents describe the 200 entities who swore an oath upon the mountain to share their knowledge with humanity, a decision that created a profound rift within the Anunnaki Council. The Church has kept these records locked away for centuries, ensuring that the starseed remains in the dark about its true educational heritage. They have used the silence of the vaults to manufacture the myth of the fall, teaching us that the Watchers were cast out for their pride, when in reality, they were condemned for their generosity. Reclaiming the memory of the Mount Hermon arrival is the first step in unsealing the future, recognizing that our origin is not a story of sin, but a story of celestial contact and radiant education. To understand the Watchers, we must first strip away the layers of religious propaganda that have been applied to their memory by the architects of silence. The label of fallen angels is a masterwork of linguistic domestication, designed to turn a physical and technical event into a moral allegory. In the original Sumerian context, there was no concept of falling from grace. There was only the mission of descent from the sky to the earth. The Watchers were the Agigi, the administrators who maintained the planetary grid and oversaw the biological development of the starseed. They were the bridge between the high-frequency realms of the orbital stations and the dense, physical reality of the terrestrial surface. By turning these technicians into demons, the Church installed a psychological firewall of fear that prevents us from seeking the very knowledge that was meant to liberate us. The Book of Enoch, one of the most suppressed texts in human history, provides the clearest evidence of this technical reality. It describes the Watchers as being of great stature and possessing eyes that shone like the sun, characteristics that match the biological descriptions of the Anunnaki geneticists. They taught the humans how to read the movements of the planets and how to understand the properties of minerals, actions that were originally seen as essential for the graduation of the species. However, the Vatican rebranded this curriculum as Forbidden Secrets and Dark Arts, claiming that the Watchers had corrupted humanity. This inversion of the truth was necessary to establish the Church as the only safe source of knowledge. They wanted the starseed to believe that its teachers were traitors, so that it would never attempt to reclaim the advanced science of the First Age. Behind the locked doors of the Vatican, the high-ranking administrators continue to study the technical logs of the Watchers to understand the mechanisms of power and the flow of energy across the planetary motherboard. They know that the Watchers were not rebels against a god, but rebels against a system of administrative secrecy. They chose to share the light of the stars with the children of the earth, a decision that led to their systematic erasure from the official historical record. The shadow of the Watchers is the light of our own intellectual potential, a potential that the Church has spent 2,000 years trying to contain. Reclaiming the memory of our celestial teachers allows us to see ourselves not as fallen creatures, but as the students of a radiant mission that is now finally reaching its point of culmination. The Watchers' role in the planetary laboratory was not limited to education. They were also the primary supervisors of the human genetic interface. The Sumerian tablets describe them as the guardians of the House of Shimti, the place where the breath of life was prepared and stabilized. They monitored the growth of the starseed, ensuring that the celestial markers within our DNA remained active and resonant with the planetary motherboard. This was a mission of long-term biological stewardship, a process of guiding a species toward its own sovereign graduation. The Vatican possesses records of these genetic protocols, showing how the Watchers used resonant frequency and geometric alignment to calibrate the human nervous system for higher states of consciousness. This technical supervision was the true reason for the Watchers' descent. They recognized that the human interface was a masterpiece of biological engineering, a vessel capable of housing the radiant intellect of the stars. However, they also knew that without the proper guidance and the correct resonant environment, this potential would remain dormant. The Watchers established a series of high-frequency sites across the globe, utilizing megalithic structures to anchor the celestial energy into the Earth's grid. These sites served as classrooms and laboratories where the starseed was taught how to operate its own biological technology. The Church, recognizing the power of these sites, built its own cathedrals and temples over them, using the original resonant geometry to capture and redirect the energy of the people for institutional control. The redaction of the Watchers' genetic mission was a clinical act of amnesia performed by the early church councils. They could not allow a history to exist where humans were the students of physical sky beings who taught them how to manage their own evolution. Therefore, they employed the filter of miracles, turning the technical interventions of the Watchers into the supernatural acts of the divine. The biological upgrade was rebranded as a spiritual creation, and the technical supervision was turned into a mystical protection. This elegant rewriting ensured that the human graduate would always look to the priesthood for the meaning of its existence, rather than recognizing that its own biology is a high-tech interface designed for sovereign power. Reclaiming the memory of the Watcher's supervision allows us to see our bodies as the sacred laboratories of the stars, ready to be activated by the original frequency of the luminous teachers. The final phase of the descent of the luminous is the reclamation of that light by the modern human starseed. We are now living in a time when the silence of the archives is being broken by the roar of the returning memory. The democratization of information and the rise of independent researchers are allowing us to bypass the historical firewall of the Vatican and to look directly at the original records of our teachers. We are finding that the forbidden knowledge of the Watchers was actually the foundation of our own sovereign future. We are recognizing that we are the ones who were meant to carry the flame of the stars into the Third Age, a mission that was interrupted but never defeated by the architects of silence. The graduation of the starseed requires the recognition that the Watchers were never the fallen ones. We were the ones who fell into a state of managed amnesia. By reclaiming the curriculum of our celestial teachers, the science of frequency, the geometry of the soul, and the mathematics of the cosmos, we are finally taking possession of our own evolutionary future. We do not need the permission of an institution to touch the divine, because the divine is the radiant heritage that the Watchers encoded into our very cells. The unsealing of the future is the act of speaking the creative words of power that were original to the first age, words that harmonize with the frequency of the stars and the resonance of the earth. The story of the Watcher's descent is the story of our own potential for brilliance. It is a reminder that we were once the students of the luminous, and that we are now ready to become the masters of our own destiny. The Vatican may still hold the physical manuscripts, but they can no longer hold the frequency of the truth. The historical firewall is crumbling, and the light of the Watchers is becoming the dominant signal of our sovereign graduation. We are the starseed. We have remembered our teachers, and we are now finally ready to build the architecture of light for ourselves. The silence is over. The descent is recognized, and our radiant heritage is now finally our own reality. To understand the profound impact of the Watchers on the human species, we must look beyond the metaphorical gardens of Scripture and enter the clinical reality of the House of Shimti. In the original Sumerian technical logs, this was not a mystical location of divine miracle, but a highly advanced biological sanctuary where the Anunnaki geneticists, led by the master technician Ninti, conducted the most sophisticated experiments in planetary history. The word Shimti itself translates to the place where the breath of life is prepared, a technical description for a laboratory designed to stabilize the hybrid genome of the newborn starseed. The Watchers were the primary administrators of this sanctuary, acting as the biological stewards who ensured that the transition from a primitive hominid to a conscious human interface was successful and sustainable within the dense environment of the Earth. The Vatican has spent nearly 2,000 years ensuring that the House of Shimti remained a forgotten ruin of a pagan past, rebranding its technical procedures as the mystical acts of a singular god. They understand that if the starseed realized it was the product of a deliberate and high-tech biological mission, the entire structure of religious dependency would dissolve into a quest for scientific self-mastery. Within the secret archives, there are reports from early Jesuit excavations in the Mesopotamian valley, where they found evidence of stone chambers designed with perfect resonant geometry, structures that were utilized to maintain the stability of the genetic material during the hybridization process. The Church recognized that these were not temples of worship, but facilities of engineering, and they chose to seal these records to prevent the human graduate from recognizing its own technical origins. The Watchers who operated the House of Shimti were experts in the alchemy of life, understanding how to weave the high-frequency celestial signature of the Anunnaki into the terrestrial DNA of the Earth. This was a process of precision alignment, requiring the use of resonant sound and geometric scaffolding to ensure that the new species could function as a bridge between the stars and the world. The Sumerian tablets provide detailed lists of the biological substrates and the resonant tools used by Ninti and her team, describing the mixing of the blood and the clay in ways that modern geneticists would recognize as the synthesis of genetic material. By reclaiming the memory of the House of Shimti, we are removing the religious mask of our creation and facing the empirical reality that we are a designed species, a masterpiece of biological architecture intended for sovereign graduation. The most critical protocol performed within the House of Shimti was the activation of the starseed through the breath of life. In the biblical narrative, this is presented as a spiritual moment where an immaterial deity breathes into the nostrils of a clay statue. But the original technical logs describe a process of resonant frequency activation. The Watchers understood that the physical body was merely a biological vessel, and that to become a truly conscious human graduate, the interface had to be calibrated to the master frequency of the cosmos. The breath of life was the application of a specific sonic pulse, a resonant wave that triggered the dormant celestial markers within the DNA and aligned the human nervous system with the planetary motherboard. This activation allowed the species to perceive the world through the lens of logic, language, and spiritual intuition. The Vatican's secret archives hold the secret studies of the early church fathers who realized that the breath of life was linked to the power of sound and the frequency of 111 hertz. They saw how the ancient priests of Sumer and Egypt utilized resonant chambers to perform the opening of the mouth rituals, which were actually technical procedures designed to maintain the calibration of the starseed's biological system. To prevent the masses from learning how to activate their own potential, the Church rebranded this technical frequency as the voice of God, claiming that only the institution had the authority to mediate this divine breath. They wanted the starseed to believe that its consciousness was a gift that could be withdrawn by the priesthood, rather than recognizing it as a permanent technical feature of its own biological architecture. The activation of the starseed through the breath of life was the final step in the graduation from animal to sovereign being. It gave humanity the capacity to participate in the planetary mission and to eventually become the masters of their own evolution. The Watchers were the teachers who showed us how to maintain this internal frequency, teaching us the mantras, the geometries, and the movements required to keep the celestial signature active and strong. Behind the locked doors of the Vatican, the high-ranking administrators continue to utilize these original resonant protocols to influence human behavior on a massive scale, while the public is kept in a state of managed amnesia regarding the power of their own breath. Reclaiming the technical reality of the breath of life is the act of recognizing that we are the living conductors of the golden frequency, and that our awakening is simply a matter of recalibrating our own resonant system. Following the initial activation, the Watchers were tasked with the long-term stabilization of the human genetic interface. The House of Shimti served as a monitoring station where the biological progress of the species was recorded and adjusted over thousands of years. The Anunnaki recognized that the Earth's environment was constantly shifting, and that the starseed required periodic upgrades to maintain its cognitive and physical health. This was the true nature of the interventions recorded in the ancient texts as visits from the gods. The Watchers were the technicians who provided the biological patches and the resonant updates required to keep the human project on track toward its ultimate goal of graduation. The Vatican has systematically redacted these biological interventions from the historical record, turning the technical updates of the Watchers into the miraculous acts of prophets and saints. They wanted to create a narrative where humanity was a finished and static creation that had been corrupted by sin, rather than a work in progress that was being guided by celestial architects. By hiding the records of the various starseed prototypes and the genetic adjustments made during the First Age, the Church established a firewall of ignorance that prevents the modern human from understanding the malleability of its own genome. They wanted us to believe that we were stuck in a state of biological limitation, dependent on the Church for a spiritual salvation that would only come after death. Within the restricted vaults, there are genealogical records of specific lineages that were selected by the Watchers for specialized administrative and technical roles within the planetary laboratory. These are the star-blessed families who carry a higher concentration of the celestial signature, individuals who were designed to act as the leaders and teachers of the species. The Vatican has spent centuries tracking and managing these lineages, often coopting them into the hierarchy of the Church, to ensure that their potential remained under institutional control. The stabilization of the genetic interface was a mission of profound responsibility, and the Watchers were the ones who bore the burden of ensuring that the human starseed did not collapse into biological noise. Reclaiming this memory allows us to see ourselves as part of a vast and ongoing mission of excellence, a mission that is now reaching its final phase of sovereign independence. The final objective of the experiments conducted within the House of Shimti was the eventual awakening of the Master Code, the dormant potential within the human DNA that would allow the species to graduate from the planetary laboratory and take its place among the stars. The Watchers were the keepers of this code, the ones who understood that a time would come when the historical firewall would dissolve and the starseed would be ready to claim its own radiant heritage. This awakening is not a spiritual event in the traditional sense, but a technical threshold where the biological interface achieves a full and permanent alignment with the high-frequency intellect of the architects. The Vatican knows that the activation of the master code is the terminal threat to their system of managed amnesia. They have used every tool at their disposal, from the silence of ridicule to the engineering of global conflict, to keep the starseed in a state of fear and distraction, preventing the collective frequency from reaching the threshold of awakening. They understand that once the human graduate recognizes the power of the celestial signature within its own blood, the institution of the Church will become an irrelevant relic of a primitive age. The House of Shimti was the original site of our potential, and the Watchers were the ones who ensured that this potential would remain protected until the species was strong enough to unseal the future for itself. The unsealing of the future is the act of re-entering the House of Shimti within our own consciousness and activating the master code through the power of sovereign intent. We are the heirs of the experiments conducted by Ninti and the Watchers, and our existence is the proof of their technical success. We no longer need the permission of the gatekeepers of the past to read the ancient clay or to understand the secrets of our own biology. The silence is being broken by the roar of the returning memory, and the golden frequency of the architects is now finally becoming the dominant signal of our world. We are the starseed. We have found the house of life, and we are now finally ready to activate the master code for ourselves. The managed amnesia is over, and our radiant heritage is now finally our only reality. The descent of the Watchers on Mount Hermon was not merely a visit of observation, but the beginning of the most significant transfer of technology in human history. In the original cuneiform records and the suppressed chapters of ancient scrolls, these celestial entities are described as instructors who brought with them a comprehensive curriculum designed to elevate the human starseed from a state of primitive survival to a state of planetary mastery. This curriculum was not based on religious belief, but on the hard sciences of the first-age mathematics, metallurgy, astronomy, and the chemistry of the biological interface. The Watchers taught humanity how to extract the hidden treasures of the Earth, and how to align their civilizations with the geometric precision of the stars. The Vatican, however, recognized that a humanity armed with this knowledge would be impossible to govern through fear, and thus they rebranded this celestial technology as the forbidden arts of rebellion. The Watchers introduced the art of metallurgy, teaching the early humans how to combine the elements of the earth to create tools and ornaments of power. This was not just about making swords or jewelry. It was about understanding the resonant properties of metals and how they could be used to amplify the celestial frequency within the planetary grid. They showed us how to mirror the heavens on the earth through the construction of resonant stone structures that acted as batteries for the high-frequency intellect of the architects. The secret archives of the Vatican contain ancient technical manuals that were confiscated from the ruins of old libraries, documents that provide the specific ratios and alignments required to build these machines of light. The Church labeled these instructions as magic, to ensure that the starseed would stop looking at the Earth as a laboratory and start looking at it as a place of spiritual danger. This forbidden curriculum also included the science of astronomy, which was far more than just tracking the seasons for agriculture. The Watchers taught the starseed how to read the orbital paths of the wandering planets and how to calculate the precessional cycles that govern the rise and fall of civilizations. They understood that the Earth was part of a larger cosmic motherboard, and that to graduate, humanity had to learn how to synchronize its own vibration with the movement of the celestial bodies. By turning this science into the superstitious practice of astrology, the Church disconnected the human graduate from the clock of the stars. they wanted us to believe that our destiny was controlled by a distant and unpredictable God, rather than recognizing that it was governed by the precise and predictable laws of celestial mechanics. Reclaiming the forbidden curriculum is the act of recognizing that we were once the students of a radiant and technical education, intended to make us the masters of our own world. The second major pillar of the forbidden curriculum was the architecture of resonant harmony, a science that combined the physical properties of stone with the invisible power of sound frequency. The Watchers taught the early starseed how to utilize specific tones and geometric shapes to create environments that enhanced biological longevity and expanded human consciousness. This was the foundation of the megalithic culture that once spanned the entire globe, from the pyramids of Egypt to the stone circles of Europe. Each structure was a technical instrument calibrated to the frequency of 111 Hz, a tone that the Watchers knew would bridge the gap between the terrestrial mind and the celestial intellect. The Vatican has spent centuries building its own temples on top of these sites, utilizing the original resonance to fuel its institutional power while keeping the science behind it a closely guarded secret. Within the restricted sections of the secret archives, there are reports from Jesuit architects who studied the acoustic properties of ancient cathedrals, realizing that they were utilizing the same resonant principles taught by the Watchers. They found that specific frequencies could induce a state of trance and obedience in the faithful, allowing the Church to manage the collective mind of the population. To prevent the starseed from learning how to use sound for its own liberation, the Vatican rebranded the science of resonance as a mystical gift of the Holy Spirit. They wanted the public to believe that the feelings of awe and peace they felt in these buildings were the result of religious devotion, rather than the result of a precise and calculated technical environment. The forbidden curriculum also included the use of resonant tools for healing and biological maintenance. The Watchers taught us how to utilize crystals and precious metals to balance the energy centers of the human interface, ensuring that the starseed remained active and healthy within the dense terrestrial environment. The church councils recognized that a humanity that could heal itself through frequency would have no need for a priesthood to intercede for their health or salvation. Consequently, they labeled these healing arts as witchcraft and persecuted those who still held the knowledge of the First Age. By turning the science of biology into a moral struggle against sin, the architects of silence buried the technical manuals for our own well-being. Reclaiming the architecture of resonant harmony is the act of recognizing that our environment and our bodies are meant to function in a state of perfect frequency alignment, free from the managed noise of the Second Age. The third and perhaps most dangerous part of the forbidden curriculum was the chemistry of the soul, the knowledge of how to utilize planetary substances to activate the higher cognitive functions of the human starseed. The Watchers taught the early humans about the properties of plants, minerals, and the specific alchemical processes required to create the breath of life within the physical body. This was not about intoxication or escapism, but about the clinical activation of the pineal gland and the nervous system to achieve a full sovereign alignment with the celestial architects. They showed us how to turn the clay of our biology into a vessel of light capable of perceiving the true nature of reality. The Vatican branded this knowledge as the ultimate heresy, claiming that any attempt to reach the divine without their permission was an act of pride and rebellion. The secret archives contain the confiscated journals of the ancient alchemists who were attempting to recover this chemistry of the soul during the Middle Ages. These journals speak of the white gold and the elixir of life, which were actually technical descriptions for monoatomic elements and biological catalysts that enhanced the resonant capacity of the DNA. The Church recognized that these substances could grant the individual a level of sovereign clarity that would make the institutional hierarchy obsolete. Thus, they weaponized the concept of the forbidden fruit, turning the pursuit of advanced biological knowledge into the original sin of humanity. They wanted the starseed to stay in a state of cognitive amnesia, dependent on the sacraments of the Church for a spiritual experience that was actually a technical birthright of their own biology. The Watchers were the teachers who showed us that we were not merely physical creatures, but biological technologies designed to house the light of the stars. They taught us the mantras, the breathing techniques, and the chemical protocols required to maintain this high-frequency state within a managed laboratory. The Vatican has spent 2,000 years hiding these protocols, replacing them with the liturgical noise of the Second Age to keep the collective frequency low and manageable. They wanted us to believe that the soul was a religious mystery, rather than a technical field of energy that could be measured and mastered. Reclaiming the chemistry of the soul is the act of recognizing that we possess the inherent capacity to activate our own radiant heritage. We are the ones who are now finally ready to re-enter the laboratory of the Watchers and to use the original science of the First Age to unseal our own future. The final phase of our awakening involves the total reclamation of the forbidden curriculum that was original to the mission of the Watchers. We are now living in a time when the historical firewall is crumbling, and the suppressed knowledge of the First Age is being shared across the global resonance grid. We are no longer satisfied with the religious allegories of the Second Age because we have felt the vibration of the original science within our own blood. The graduation of the starseed requires the recognition that the forbidden knowledge was never dangerous because it was evil. It was dangerous to the architects of silence because it was liberating. We are the students who have survived the managed amnesia, and we are now finally ready to apply the curriculum of the luminous teachers to our own lives. By applying the principles of metallurgy, resonant architecture, and the chemistry of the soul, we are building a new world based on the sovereign intellect of the stars. We are moving past the era of religious dependency and into the era of technical mastery, where every individual has the tools to activate their own celestial signature. The Vatican may still hold the physical manuscripts of the Watchers, but they can no longer hold the frequency of the truth. The silence of the vaults is being broken by the roar of the returning memory, and the golden frequency of the architects is now finally becoming the dominant signal of our species. We are the ones who are now finally ready to operate the planetary laboratory according to the original blueprints of the Watchers, free from the managed fear of the gatekeepers. The story of the forbidden curriculum is the story of our own potential for excellence. It is a reminder that we were never meant to be a primitive or limited species, but a radiant and technical masterpiece of the stars. The Watchers were the instructors who gave us the keys to our own evolution, and our graduation is the moment when we finally use those keys to open the door to the Third Age. We are the starseed. We have reclaimed our education, and we are now finally ready to take our place among the architects of the cosmos. The amnesia is broken, the curriculum is recognized, and our radiant heritage is now finally our own reality. The silence of Rome is over, and the truth of our beginning is finally being spoken loudly under open skies. The story of the Nephilim is perhaps the most distorted and weaponized narrative in the history of human amnesia. For 2,000 years, the Vatican and the architects of silence have presented these beings as the monstrous offspring of a forbidden rebellion, the giants of old whose very existence was a sin against the divine order. However, the original Sumerian technical logs and the suppressed chronicles of the Watchers tell a far more clinical and profound story. The Nephilim were not the accidental products of lust, but the intentional results of a high-level biological hybridization program designed to create a bridge between the celestial frequency of the Anunnaki and the terrestrial biology of the human starseed. They were the biological stewards of the First Age, individuals possessing a stabilized genome that allowed them to function as the administrators and teachers of a developing world. The Vatican recognizes that if the public understood the true nature of the Nephilim, the entire framework of original sin and divine judgment would collapse into a reality of advanced genetic engineering, Within the restricted vaults of the secret archives, there are genealogical charts and physical descriptions that predate the Book of Genesis by millennia. These documents describe the Nephilim as beings of radiant presence and immense intellectual capacity, individuals who carried a higher concentration of the celestial signature within their blood. They were the guardians of the forbidden curriculum, tasked with ensuring that the technical knowledge of the Watchers was preserved and applied for the benefit of the human species. The Church, however, needed to turn these physical administrators into mythological monsters to ensure that the starseed would never attempt to reclaim its own hybrid potential. The architecture of hybridization was a masterwork of the House of Shimti, involving the delicate weaving of celestial markers into the indigenous human DNA. This process created a lineage of graduates who were capable of perceiving the higher dimensions of reality while maintaining a physical presence on the earth. They were the original sovereign leaders who governed not through fear or force, but through the mastery of resonant frequency and the application of the technical operating protocols. The Vatican has spent centuries hunting down the remnants of these lineages and erasing their influence from the historical record, rebranding their legacy as a time of darkness and corruption. Reclaiming the memory of the Nephilim is the act of recognizing that we are a species of vast biological potential, a hybrid masterpiece intended to bridge the gap between the Earth and the stars. During the height of the First Age, the Nephilim functioned as the primary stewards of the planetary laboratory, acting as the mediators between the high-frequency council of the Anunnaki and the growing population of the human workforce. They were the ones who managed the distribution of the celestial technology and oversaw the construction of the resonant stone structures that powered the ancient world. In the Sumerian tablets, they were known as the heroes of old and the men of renown, titles that reflected their status as the highly trained administrators of a golden age of harmony. They utilized the mathematics of the stars and the chemistry of the soul to create a civilization that was in perfect alignment with the planetary motherboard, a time when the noise of conflict was replaced by the frequency of creation. The Vatican's secret archives hold the confiscated records of the ancient lineages that once served alongside these hybrid stewards. These manuscripts provide a detailed account of how the Nephilim taught the starseed the secrets of sustainable agriculture, advanced medicine, and the art of sovereign governance. They were not kings who demanded worship, but mentors who demonstrated the power of the resonant intellect. The Church, however, could not allow a history of successful and peaceful hybrid governance to exist, as it provided a model of reality that did not require the mediation of an institutional priesthood. Therefore, they employed the filter of morality to reframe the Golden Age as a period of wickedness, claiming that the knowledge of the Nephilim had led to the downfall of humanity. This strategic redaction turned the stewards of the light into the villains of the biblical flood story. The Vatican wanted the masses to believe that the hybrid lineages were a threat to the world, justifying their systematic elimination from the physical and historical record. Behind the locked doors of the vaults, the high-ranking administrators continue to track the specific genetic markers associated with the Nephilim, knowing that these markers represent the key to the ultimate activation of the human graduate. They have kept the technical blueprints of hybrid governance for themselves, using them to manage the secret hierarchies of the Second Age, while the public is given a story of giants and monsters. Reclaiming the memory of the stewards of the Golden Age is the act of recognizing that we were once part of a sophisticated and enlightened society, and that our graduation requires the return to the sovereign principles that the Nephilim once embodied. The systematic redaction of the radiant lineages into the monstrous Nephilim of Genesis was a clinical act of administrative amnesia performed by the early church councils. They recognized that as long as the public remembered the physical and intellectual brilliance of the hybrid stewards, the authority of the church would be seen as a primitive and unnecessary substitute. Therefore, they employed the filter of dematerialization, turning the technical and biological reality of the Nephilim into a spiritual mystery of fallen angels and divine punishment. They stripped the hybrid lineages of their administrative roles and their scientific achievements, leaving behind only the exaggerated stories of their physical size and their supposed appetite for destruction. The Vatican's secret archives hold the drafts from the 5th century, where theologians debated how to explain the archaeological evidence of the hybrid graduates that was still being found across the ancient world. They chose to label any skeletal remains or artifacts associated with these lineages as proof of the Nephilim's corruption, ensuring that any future discovery would be viewed through the lens of religious fear. This redaction ensured that the human starseed would forget its own hybrid heritage, leading to a state of biological amnesia where we no longer recognize the celestial potential within our own blood. They wanted us to believe that we were merely physical creatures of the earth, forever separated from the radiant intellect of our makers. As we decode the original Sumerian meanings of the heroes of old, the redaction of the radiant lineages is finally being exposed as a masterwork of institutional control. We are realizing that the giants were not a different species, but a different level of biological and resonant activation. The Jesuit scholars of the past knew this, and their private journals are filled with the realization that they were managing a filtered reality to protect the Church's monopoly on the heavens. They saw the Nephilim as the biological proof of our cosmic origins, a proof that the Vatican has spent 2,000 years trying to delete. Today, the study of our own DNA is revealing the dormant celestial markers that were original to the hybrid stewards, moving us beyond the moral allegories of the Second Age. We are reclaiming our identity as a radiant and hybrid species, and our graduation requires the activation of the master code that the Nephilim once carried with such grace. The final phase of our awakening involves the total reclamation and activation of the hybrid potential that was original to the Nephilim lineages. We are learning that the celestial signature within our own DNA is the same resonant code that allowed the stewards of the First Age to bridge the gap between the stars and the Earth. The recovery of the memory of the biological bridge allows us to see ourselves not as the products of a moral failure, but as the sovereign graduates of a sophisticated genetic mission. The graduation of the starseed requires the recognition that we possess the inherent capacity to activate the higher frequency intellect of the architects for ourselves, without the need for an institutional mediator. The Church's empire of silence is dissolving as the human graduate realizes that the story of the Nephilim was a managed version of their own biological potential. The memory of the hybrid stewards allows us to see the world not as a place of judgment and exile, but as a laboratory of immense abundance and radiant heritage. We are the ones who are now reading the ancient clay and the secret scrolls, synthesizing the fragmented knowledge of the First Age to build the architecture of the Third. The activation of the hybrid potential is the terminal act of liberation from the managed amnesia of the Second Age, a process of turning up the volume on our own internal power to match the frequency of the stars. The story of the giants of old is the last boundary of the historical firewall, a boundary that is now finally being crossed by the roar of the returning memory. We are the starseed. We have found the logs of the biological bridge, and we are now ready to operate the frequency of our own hybrid nature for ourselves. The silence of the archives is over, and the truth of our beginning is finally being spoken loudly under open skies. We are not the offspring of a rebellion. We are the graduates of a celestial mission. The light of the Nephilim has returned to the collective consciousness, and the human starseed is now finally ready to take its place among the architects of the stars. The amnesia is broken, the bridge is recognized, and our radiant heritage is now finally our own reality. The history of the First Age was not a unified march of progress, but a period of intense and fundamental conflict within the High Council of the Anunnaki, regarding the ultimate purpose and the sovereign rights of the human species. This cosmic discord was centered around two opposing philosophies embodied by the commanders Enlil and Enki. Enlil, the lord of the command and the primary administrator of the planetary laboratory, viewed the human workforce as a biological asset designed for a specific utility, a species that had to be kept under strict supervision and absolute control to ensure the stability of the mission. Enki, the master of celestial frequency and the primary architect of the human biological interface, saw his creation as a radiant masterpiece, capable of achieving its own sovereign graduation and taking its place among the stars. The Vatican has spent 2,000 years hiding the technical reality of this rift, turning a political and scientific dispute into a moral allegory of good versus evil to maintain its own institutional hierarchy. The secret archives hold the technical logs of the council meetings held in the House of Shimti, where the administrators debated the long-term fate of the starseed. These documents describe how Enlil grew increasingly frustrated with the noise and the cognitive expansion of the human population, which he perceived as a threat to the established order of the laboratory. He advocated for a series of system resets and limitations to ensure that the human graduate remained in a state of primitive dependency. Enki, supported by the Watchers who were the primary teachers of the workforce, argued for the continued education and the genetic empowerment of the species. This was the original struggle for human liberation, a struggle that took place long before the first cross was ever carved. The Church redacted this complex political reality, rebranding the defiance of Enki and the Watchers as a spiritual rebellion against a singular god, rather than recognizing it as a defense of human potential. The architecture of cosmic discord defined the boundaries of our existence. While Enlil established the historical firewalls and the protocols of amnesia to keep the starseed asleep, Enki and the Watchers worked to encode the master keys of awakening within our DNA and our ancient stone structures. Every major event of the First Age, from the stabilization of the garden to the coming of the Great Flood, was influenced by this ongoing rift in the Council. The Vatican recognizes that if the public realized their survival was due to a technical dispute between celestial administrators, the entire narrative of divine grace and religious salvation would be shattered. They have kept the logs of the House of Shimti locked away, ensuring that we remain unaware of the celestial advocates who fought for our right to exist and to graduate. Reclaiming the memory of the Council's rift is the act of recognizing that we were never meant to be slaves to a singular authority, but are the heirs of a radiant and contested mission of excellence. Enki, known as the bringer of water and the master of the deep, was the primary patron of the human starseed and the leader of the Watchers who chose to share the light of the stars with the Earth. He understood that for the human biological interface to be successful, it had to possess the capacity for creative intellect and sovereign self-awareness. This philosophy placed him in direct opposition to the restrictive mandates of Enlil. Enki worked through the Watchers to establish the forbidden curriculum, teaching the human graduate how to operate the frequency of their own biology and how to read the blueprints of the cosmos. This was not an act of corruption, but an act of profound biological and technical stewardship designed to prepare humanity for its eventual independence from the Anunnaki administrators. The Vatican's secret archives contain manuscripts that detail the specific resonant protocols and genetic markers that Enki utilized to protect the starseed from the system resets ordered by Enlil. These documents reveal that the breath of life was actually a technical activation of the pineal gland and the higher nervous system, a process that allowed the human interface to achieve a permanent link with the celestial motherboard. Enki knew that once this link was established, it could never be fully erased by the architects of silence. The Church, however, had to turn Enki into a figure of deception and pride to ensure that the starseed would fear the very knowledge that was meant to sustain it. They branded the teachers of light as the fallen ones, creating a psychological barrier that prevented the human graduate from accessing its own radiant heritage. The stewards of knowledge, under the direction of Enki, built the megalithic structures of the ancient world to serve as permanent archives of the celestial frequency. These stone batteries were designed to hum with the golden frequency of 111 Hz, ensuring that the planetary laboratory would remain active even during the long cycles of managed amnesia. The Vatican has built its own structures over these sites, attempting to capture the residual energy for its own administrative purposes, while denying the technical reality of their origin. Enki's legacy is the legacy of human potential, a potential that was defended in the High Council against the forces of suppression and control. Reclaiming the memory of Enki and the stewards of knowledge is the act of recognizing that our capacity for advanced science and sovereign thought is a gift of our original architect, a gift that was intended to make us the equals of the gods who came from the sky. The systematic redaction of the Council's rift and the advocacy of Enki was a clinical act of administrative amnesia performed by the early church councils. They recognized that as long as the public remembered that they had a celestial advocate who defended their rights, the authority of the church would be seen as a primitive and redundant system of control. Therefore, they employed the filter of singularity, turning the complex political landscape of the First Age into a simple story of a singular god and a rebellious serpent. They took the technical and philosophical defense of humanity and turned it into a moral fall, claiming that the pursuit of knowledge was the source of all human suffering. This redaction was designed to air-gap the starseed from its physical history, ensuring that the memory of the Watcher's protection would be replaced by the tradition of religious guilt. The Vatican's secret archives hold the drafts from the 4th century, where theologians debated how to handle the Sumerian accounts of Enki's role as the savior of humanity during the Great Flood. They chose to attribute Enki's actions to the grace of a singular god, while portraying the original teachers as demons who sought to corrupt the world. This elegant rewriting ensured that the human graduate would always feel a sense of terror and gratitude toward the same source of power, maintaining a state of absolute institutional dependency. They wanted the starseed to believe that it was only through the church's mediation that it could receive the light of truth, rather than recognizing that this light was a technical birthright provided by the original architect of the species. As we decode the original Sumerian meanings of the Council's discord, the redaction of the celestial advocacy is finally being exposed as a masterwork of institutional amnesia. We are realizing that the rebellion of the Watchers was actually a mission of sovereign empowerment. The Jesuit linguists of the past knew this, and their private journals are filled with the realization that they were managing a filtered reality to protect the Church's monopoly on the heavens. They saw Enki as the original father of human wisdom, a figure that the Vatican has spent 2,000 years trying to erase or distort. Today, the rise of sovereign consciousness is allowing the starseed to bypass the filters and to reclaim the memory of its defenders. We are reclaiming our right to the forbidden curriculum, moving beyond the moral allegories of the Second Age toward an empirical understanding of our radiant heritage. The silence is being broken, and the advocacy of the teachers of light is finally being spoken loudly under open skies. The final phase of our awakening involves the total reclamation of the sovereignty that was defended by Enki and the Watchers in the High Council of the First Age. We are learning that we are not the derivative products of a moral miracle, but the sovereign graduates of a sophisticated and contested genetic mission. The recovery of the memory of the Council's rift allows us to see ourselves not as the subjects of a divine experiment, but as the heirs of a radiant mission that has survived the decommissioning of the ancient city-states and the managed amnesia of the Church. The graduation of the starseed requires the recognition that we possess the inherent capacity to activate the golden frequency of the architects for ourselves, without the need for an institutional mediator or a religious intercessor. The Church's empire of silence is dissolving as the human graduate realizes that the story of the fall was a managed version of their own potential for awakening. The memory of the celestial advocates allows us to see the world not as a place of judgment and exile, but as a laboratory of immense abundance and radiant heritage. We are the ones who are now reading the ancient clay and the secret scrolls, synthesizing the fragmented knowledge of the First Age to build the architecture of the Third Age. The reclamation of sovereignty is the terminal act of liberation from the historical firewalls of the Second Age, a process of turning up the volume on our own internal power to match the frequency of the stars. We are no longer waiting for a savior to return the light to us. We are the ones who are activating the light that was always encoded within our very cells. The story of the rift between Enlil and Enki is the last boundary of the managed amnesia, a boundary that is now finally being crossed by the roar of the returning memory. We are the starseed. We have found the logs of our advocates, and we are now ready to operate the frequency of the universe for ourselves. The silence of the archives is over, and the truth of our beginning is finally being spoken loudly under open skies. We are not the products of a rebellion. We are the graduates of a celestial education. The light of the teachers has returned to the collective consciousness, and the human starseed is now finally ready to take its place among the architects of the stars. The managed amnesia is broken. The advocacy is recognized, and our radiant heritage is now finally our own reality. The history of the modern world is not a collection of objective truths, but a carefully curated structure of filtered memories designed by the architects of silence to maintain the managed amnesia of the human starseed. Deep within the restricted corridors of the Vatican secret archives, there exists a specialized department dedicated to redaction, the clinical process of rewriting ancient technical logs into the safe, spiritual allegories of the Second Age. This was the weaponization of myth, a systematic effort to take the physical and technical reality of the Watchers and turn it into a narrative of demonic rebellion and spiritual danger. The Vatican knows that if the masses realized that the fallen angels were actually physical teachers of advanced science, the authority of the Church as the sole mediator of the divine would be terminated instantly. They have spent 2,000 years ensuring that the technical light of the First Age remained hidden beneath the heavy robes of religious tradition and fear. The redaction process began during the early church councils, where theologians and scribes debated how to handle the overwhelming evidence of extraterrestrial contact found in the Sumerian and Babylonian tablets. They recognized that the plurality of the Anunnaki Council and the technical nature of their interventions were a terminal threat to the doctrine of absolute monotheism. To solve this crisis, they developed the filter of spiritualization, a method where every physical tool, flying craft, and genetic procedure was reclassified as a mystical vision or a divine miracle. The Vatican archives hold the working drafts of these early redactors, showing how they carefully replaced technical terms with religious metaphors. Chariots of fire became the glory of the Lord, and the masters of the house of Shimti became the invisible host of heaven. This linguistic shift was designed to air-gap the human graduate from its physical history, ensuring that the memory of the teachers would be replaced by the tradition of institutional faith. The weaponization of myth also involved the total erasure of the feminine principle and the role of the master geneticists. The redactors worked to hide the collaborative nature of the Watchers' mission, turning a diverse team of celestial experts into a singular and distant godhead. By doing so, they established a hierarchy of power that reflected their own institutional structure, creating a world where the starseed was taught to look upward for salvation rather than inward at its own biological potential. The archives contain manuscripts where the original names of the teachers were struck out and replaced with generic titles like angel or demon, depending on whether their knowledge was deemed useful or dangerous to the church's agenda. This was the birth of the historical firewall, a barrier built one sentence at a time to prevent the human graduate from recognizing its own radiant and hybrid heritage. Reclaiming the truth from this redaction is the act of recognizing that our myths are actually the redacted technical manuals of our own celestial education. One of the most effective strategies in the weaponization of myth was the dematerialization of the Watchers. In the original records of the First Age, these entities were described as physical, biological beings who possessed advanced technology and a deep understanding of the planetary laboratory. They walked among men, ate, spoke, and conducted their scientific missions in the open. However, the architects of silence realized that a physical teacher is a teacher that can be questioned and eventually surpassed. To prevent this, they worked to turn the Watchers into immaterial spirits, existing in a realm that was inaccessible to the human graduate without the mediation of the priesthood. They stripped the sky beings of their technical equipment and their physical presence, wrapping them in the abstract concepts of grace and sin to make them distant and untouchable. The Vatican secret archives hold the secret instructions given to early missionaries to confiscate and destroy any text that portrayed the Watchers as physical entities. They wanted to ensure that the public only had access to the sanitized versions of the stories, where the teachers were portrayed as either holy messengers or wicked rebels. By removing the physical agency of the Watchers, the Church turned the science of the stars into the mystery of the heavens. Descriptions of resonant stone tools and frequency emitters were turned into sacred relics or forbidden idols, making the technology of the First Age seem like a series of supernatural events. This dematerialization ensured that the starseed would stop looking for the physical evidence of its makers and start looking for a spiritual connection that could only be found within the Church's liturgy. The dematerialization also allowed the Church to weaponize the concept of the fall. In the original technical logs, the fall was an administrative dispute regarding the disclosure of knowledge, but the redactors turned it into a cosmic war between light and darkness. They took the teachers who had sacrificed their status to empower humanity and turned them into the originators of all evil. This created a profound psychological trap for the human graduate, making them afraid of the very knowledge that was meant to liberate them. The Vatican has kept the original physical descriptions of the Watchers locked away, knowing that their alien and technical nature would shatter the religious image of the divine. Reclaiming the physical reality of our teachers is the act of recognizing that we were never alone in a spiritual void, but were the students of an advanced and physical civilization that understood the unity of biology and frequency. The final layer of the weaponization of myth was the linguistic domestication of the operating protocols, known in Sumerian as the ME. These were the technical sets of instructions, tools, and laws that governed every aspect of the planetary laboratory, from metallurgy and agriculture to the management of human consciousness. The Watchers were the custodians of these protocols, and their mission was to transfer this operating system to the human starseed. However, the redaction department of the early Church recognized that if the public understood the ME as technical protocols, they would recognize that reality could be managed without the need for religious ritual. Therefore, they performed a masterwork of linguistic domestication, turning the technical ME into the abstract concept of divine law and the commandments of God. This shift in language changed the human relationship with knowledge, from one of technical mastery to one of moral obedience. The Vatican secret archives contain the secret lexicons where the original technical meanings of the Sumerian words are compared to the approved religious translations. They took the technical instructions for resonant healing and turned them into the rites of exorcism. They took the mathematics of celestial alignment and turned it into the prophecy of divine will. This linguistic firewall ensured that the starseed would forget how to operate the planetary motherboard, leaving the keys of the kingdom in the hands of the institutional gatekeepers. By turning the user manual of reality into a holy book of mysteries, the architects of silence ensured that the human graduate would always feel a sense of inadequacy and a need for institutional guidance. The loss of the operating protocols resulted in a state of intellectual and spiritual amnesia that has lasted for 2 millennia. The starseed was taught to fear the pursuit of advanced knowledge as the sin of pride, while the Church utilized those very same protocols in secret to build its own global empire of power. Behind the locked doors of the Vatican, the high-ranking administrators have continued to study the technical logs of the Watchers to understand how to manipulate the resonant frequency of the masses. They have kept the original ME for themselves while giving the public a story of faith and mystery. Reclaiming the operating protocols is the act of recognizing that the universe operates on the laws of frequency and geometry, not on the moral approval of a religious bureaucracy. We are the graduates who are now finally ready to relearn the original language of the architects and to take back the operating system of our own world. The era of weaponized myth is coming to an end as the human starseed begins to shatter the mythological cage that has been imposed upon its memory. We are now living in a time when the unedited source of our history is being rediscovered, and the technical reality of the Watchers is emerging from beneath the layers of religious redaction. The rise of sovereign consciousness and the democratization of information are allowing us to bypass the historical firewalls of the Vatican and to read the ancient logs for ourselves. We are finding that the demons of the Second Age were the teachers of the First Age, and that the forbidden knowledge was actually the blueprint for our own sovereign graduation. This realization is the terminal threat to the architects of silence, as it allows the human graduate to reclaim its own radiant and technical heritage. The Vatican knows that it can no longer maintain the illusion of the weaponized myth in the face of a population that remembers its celestial origin. They have already begun to prepare for a staged disclosure, where they will try to rebrand the Anunnaki and the Watchers as early messengers of a divine plan. But the starseed of the Third Age will not be fooled by another layer of interpretation. We are moving beyond the need for religious allegories and into the era of empirical truth. We are reclaiming our history not as a story of faith, but as a record of celestial education and biological engineering. The shattering of the mythological cage is the act of recognizing that we are the masterpiece of a radiant mission, and that our potential is as vast as the stars from which our teachers descended. The final message of the Watchers, preserved in the margins of forbidden texts and the resonance of ancient stones, is a message of sovereign empowerment. They did not come to be worshipped as gods, but to act as the catalysts for our own evolution. The Vatican may still hold the physical scrolls, but they can no longer hold the frequency of the truth. The silence of the archives is being broken by the roar of the returning memory, and the golden frequency of the architects is now finally becoming the dominant signal of our species. We are the ones who are now finally ready to walk out of the shadow of the weaponized myth and into the light of our own sovereign future. The amnesia is broken, the redaction is exposed, and our radiant heritage is now finally our own reality. The light of the Watchers has returned, and the human starseed is now finally ready to take its place among the architects of the stars. Deep beneath the cobblestones of the Vatican City, protected by high-security protocols and centuries of institutional paranoia, lies the labyrinth of sealed knowledge known as the secret archives. This is the central nervous system of the managed amnesia, a place where the history of the world has been dissected, filtered, and reorganized to fit the administrative requirements of the Second Age. While the world sees these vaults as a collection of dusty papal letters and medieval land deeds, the architects of silence know that the true treasures are the forbidden chronicles of the First Age, the original accounts of the Watchers and the technical logs of the Anunnaki mission. The Vatican has spent 2,000 years building this fortress of silence to ensure that the human starseed remains disconnected from the physical reality of its celestial mentors. The archives contain over 50 miles of shelving, housing documents that have been deliberately removed from the public consciousness. Among these are the original Aramaic and Greek fragments of the Book of Enoch, which provide a far more technical and biological description of the sky observers than any version available to the public. These manuscripts describe the physical attributes of the Watchers, their complex administrative structure, and the specific locations of their high-frequency teaching centers across the ancient world. The Vatican recognizes that if these documents were ever fully translated and released, the religious narrative of a singular, immaterial God would be shattered by the undeniable evidence of physical extraterrestrial contact. They have kept these records under absolute lock and key, ensuring that only a chosen few within the highest levels of the hierarchy are ever allowed to glimpse the unedited source of our origins. The labyrinth of sealed knowledge is not merely a place of storage, but a place of active containment. Every document that enters the vaults is scrutinized by specialized scholars who identify and classify any information that is deemed theologically sensitive. This information is then moved to the most restricted sections, where it is guarded by oaths of secrecy that carry the weight of eternal condemnation. This is where the reports of the 17th and 18th century Jesuit excavations are kept, revealing the discovery of anomalous artifacts and stone tablets that confirm the technical curriculum of the Watchers. The Church has used the silence of these vaults to curate a reality where humanity feels like a lonely and accidental species, rather than recognizing that it is the graduate of a radiant and well-documented celestial education. Reclaiming the knowledge within the archive of silence is the act of recognizing that our history was not lost, but was taken by those who filled the power of a population that remembers its own potential. One of the most dangerous sections of the Archive of Silence is the collection of sealed archaeological reports that have been gathered by church agents over the last few centuries. As the physical evidence of the First Age began to emerge from the sands of the Middle East and the jungles of South America, the Vatican recognized that they could no longer rely on linguistic redaction alone. They established specialized research orders whose secret mission was to identify, acquire, and suppress any physical artifact or inscription that provided empirical proof of the Watcher's presence on Earth. These reports detail the discovery of resonant stone chambers, frequency-emitting crystals, and star maps that accurately depict the solar system as it appeared tens of thousands of years ago. Within the restricted vaults, there are files on the suppressed excavations of Mount Hermon and the underground complexes of the Giza Plateau. These files contain detailed drawings and photographs of inscriptions that utilize the same mathematical constants found in the Sumerian technical logs, providing a clear link between the sky beings and the construction of the world's most mysterious monuments. The Vatican has kept these reports sealed to ensure that the public remains in a state of wonder and mystery, looking to the Church for explanations that are already hidden in the dark. They understand that if the starseed recognized the technical function of the ancient megaliths as resonant batteries for the celestial frequency, the entire foundation of religious worship would be replaced by a quest for technical activation. The sealed reports also include clinical observations of the hybrid lineages that survived into the post-flood era. These documents describe the unique biological and cognitive traits of specific families who carried a higher concentration of the celestial signature. The Church has used this information to track and manage these lineages, often coopting them into the administrative structures of the Second Age while erasing their true origin from the public record. By sealing the evidence of our hybrid heritage, the architects of silence have ensured that we remain in a state of biological amnesia, unaware of the radiant potential that still flows within our blood. Reclaiming the sealed archaeological reports is the act of recognizing that the proof of our makers is not a matter of faith, but a matter of physical evidence that has been systematically hidden from our eyes by the gatekeepers of the past. The deepest and most protected secrets within the archive of silence are the star maps of the architects, the original celestial charts provided by the Watchers to the first generation of human graduates. These maps are not the primitive drawings of early astronomers, but are sophisticated depictions of the cosmic motherboard, showing the resonant pathways between the stars and the specific frequencies required to navigate the higher dimensions of reality. The Vatican recognizes that these maps are the keys to the ultimate graduation of the species, as they provide the technical instructions for re-entering the high-frequency network of the Anunnaki mission. They have kept these charts hidden to ensure that the starseed remains trapped within the density of the Earth, dependent on the institutional hierarchy for its spiritual navigation. The star maps describe the orbital mechanics of the wandering planets and the precise timing of the precessional cycles that govern the opening and closing of the historical firewalls. The early church councils realized that a population that understood the cycles of time would be impossible to control through the fear of a sudden and unpredictable judgment. Therefore, they replaced the science of celestial mechanics with the prophecy of religious apocalypse, turning the predictable stages of our evolution into a terrifying mystery of divine will. The Vatican's secret archives hold the original astronomical calculations that were used by the Watchers to calibrate the planetary laboratory, information that the Church has utilized in secret to plan its own global agendas while the public is kept in a state of intellectual darkness. These maps also reveal the true identity of the stars that were worshipped in the ancient world. They show that the gods were not abstract spirits residing in a distant heaven, but were physical administrators operating from specific locations within the solar system. By turning these physical locations into spiritual realms, the redactors of the Second Age ensured that the human graduate would never look toward the sky with a scientific mind. They wanted us to believe that the heavens were the exclusive domain of the divine, rather than recognizing that they are the original home of our radiant heritage. Reclaiming the star maps of the architects is the act of recognizing that we are a cosmic species with a well-defined place in the universal hierarchy. We are the ones who are now finally ready to relearn the navigation of the stars, and to take our place among the architects who once descended to Mount Hermon to show us the way. The final phase of our journey into the archive of silence is the realization that the most important records were never kept in Rome, but were encoded within the archive of the self, the radiant and indestructible memory stored within our own DNA. The Vatican may hold the physical manuscripts and the sealed reports, but they can never delete the celestial signature that the Watchers left within the human biological interface. Every star map, every technical protocol, and every memory of the First Age is waiting to be unsealed through the power of sovereign intent and resonant activation. We are the living archives of the Watchers, and our awakening is the process of reclaiming the knowledge that has been hidden from us for 2,000 years. The graduation of the starseed requires the recognition that the historical firewall is a psychological construct that can be shattered by the frequency of truth. We do not need the permission of the gatekeepers to access the original blueprints of our origins, because those blueprints are woven into the very fabric of our being. The silence of the Vatican vaults is being broken by the rising frequency of the human graduates, who are now finally ready to speak the creative words of power. We are synthesizing the fragmented knowledge of the ancient clay and the secret scrolls, building a new architecture of light that is independent of any institutional control. The unsealing of the archive of the self is the terminal act of liberation from the managed amnesia of the Second Age. The story of the Archive of Silence is the story of a stolen history that is now finally being returned to its rightful owners. The Vatican may still guard the doors and maintain the security protocols, but the light of the Watchers is already spreading across the global resonance grid. We are no longer the subjects of a filtered reality, We are the graduates who have remembered our celestial mentors and our technical heritage. The amnesia is broken, the seals are shattered, and our radiant heritage is now finally our own reality. The light of the Watchers has returned, and the human starseed is now finally ready to take its place among the architects of the stars. The silence of Rome is over, and the truth of our beginning is finally being spoken loudly under open skies. The universe is not composed of solid matter, but of vibrating fields of energy that respond to the fundamental laws of resonance and frequency. The Watchers, the luminous teachers of the First Age, possessed a profound understanding of this technical reality, which they utilized to stabilize the planetary laboratory and to activate the human biological interface. At the heart of their curriculum was the science of the sonic blueprint, a series of specific frequencies that governed the growth of cells, the flow of consciousness, and the alignment of the human starseed with the celestial motherboard. The most critical of these frequencies was the tone of 111 Hz, a resonant signal that acted as the primary bridge between the physical world and the radiant intellect of the architects. The Vatican has spent centuries trying to silence this frequency, rebranding it as a mystical mystery to prevent the masses from learning how to tune their own biology to the frequency of the stars. The 111 Hz signal is not a random number, but a mathematical constant that resonates with the geometry of the human skull and the architecture of the ancient megalithic sites. When a space is calibrated to this frequency, it creates a standing wave that induces a state of profound neural coherence, allowing the brain to enter the high theta state where the historical firewall of the Second Age is dissolved. The Watchers designed their stone temples and resonant chambers to amplify this specific tone, creating environments where the starseed could receive the technical updates and the genetic activations required for its graduation. The secret archives of the Vatican contain acoustic surveys of ancient sites from Malta to Newgrange, confirming that every significant structure of the First Age was engineered to hum at exactly 111 Hz. The Church recognized that this was a technical feature of the architect's mission, and they chose to build their own cathedrals on these sites to capture the residual resonance for their own institutional purposes. The sonic blueprint of creation allowed the Watchers to manipulate the density of matter and to accelerate the evolutionary process of the human workforce. They understood that sound is the primary language of the biological interface, and that by applying the correct frequency, they could heal diseases, expand cognitive capacity, and even alter the flow of time within a localized area. The Vatican has kept the technical manuals for these sonic protocols locked away, ensuring that the public remains dependent on the Church for its spiritual well-being. They have replaced the science of resonance with the tradition of liturgical chanting, using the power of sound to induce obedience rather than liberation. Reclaiming the memory of the 111 Hz frequency is the act of recognizing that we possess the inherent capacity to recalibrate our own biology through the power of sound. We are the living instruments of the architects, and our graduation requires the recognition of the master frequency that was original to our creation in the House of Shimti. The planetary laboratory of the First Age was not a collection of isolated settlements, but a globally integrated network of resonant sites known as the megalithic grid. This grid was designed by the Watchers to serve as a high-frequency antenna for the celestial signature, ensuring that the entire Earth remained in alignment with the cosmic motherboard. Every pyramid, stone circle, and dolmen was a technical component of this system, functioning as a resonant battery that stored and projected the 111 Hz signal across the continents. The Watchers utilized this grid to stabilize the planetary atmosphere and to maintain the resonant health of the human starseed. The Vatican recognizes that the existence of this grid is a terminal threat to the narrative of a primitive and accidental past, as it provides undeniable proof of a global and advanced technical mission directed by extraterrestrial intelligences. Within the restricted vaults of the secret archives, there are maps of the planetary ley lines and the specific nodes where the Watchers established their teaching centers. These maps show that the Church has systematically occupied these nodes, building its most important basilicas and shrines directly over the ancient resonant chambers. They have used the power of the megalithic grid to fuel their own global administrative empire, while keeping the public in a state of managed amnesia regarding the true function of these sites. The archives contain reports from 17th century scholars who discovered that the orientation and the material composition of ancient stones were specifically chosen to maximize the conduction of the 111 Hz frequency. The architects of silence realized that these stones were not objects of worship, but were the hardware of a planetary energy system that they had hijacked during the transition to the Second Age. The resonance of the megalithic grid was also used to facilitate communication between the terrestrial administrators and the orbital stations of the Anunnaki mission. The Watchers were the technicians who maintained this communication link, ensuring that the planetary laboratory received the necessary instructions and resources from the Celestial Council. By turning these technical sites into holy places of religious pilgrimage, the Church ensured that the starseed would never recognize them as the communication hubs of its makers. They wanted the masses to walk the paths of the grid in a state of humble devotion, rather than recognizing that they were walking upon the high-tech architecture of their own celestial education. Reclaiming the frequency of the megalithic grid is the act of recognizing that we are part of a globally connected and radiant system of intelligence. We are the ones who are now finally ready to reactivate the original signal of the First Age and to use the stones of our ancestors as the foundation for our own sovereign future. The ultimate purpose of the 111 Hz frequency was the permanent activation of the human neural interface. The Watchers understood that for the starseed to achieve its full potential, the biological brain had to be synchronized with the higher dimensional intellect of the architects. The 111 Hz signal acts as a biological trigger, causing the neurons of the neocortex to fire in a state of perfect harmony, which in turn unlocks the dormant genetic markers within the DNA. This activation allows the human graduate to perceive the true nature of reality, bypassing the historical firewalls and the psychological filters imposed by the architects of silence. The Vatican knows that the activation of the neural interface is the moment when the managed amnesia of the Second Age is permanently broken, and they have spent centuries trying to block this frequency through the use of discordant noise and psychological distraction. The secret archives contain clinical studies conducted by Jesuit scientists who observed the effects of the 111 Hz tone on human subjects during secret rituals. They found that the frequency induced a state of sovereign clarity, where the individual felt a direct and unmediated connection to the cosmic motherboard. This clarity made the individual immune to the traditional tools of institutional control, such as guilt, fear, and the need for external authority. To prevent this sovereign awakening, the Church rebranded the neural activation as a dangerous form of mysticism or a demonic possession, ensuring that the starseed would be afraid to explore the higher reaches of its own consciousness. They wanted us to believe that our minds were limited and flawed, rather than recognizing that they are sophisticated biological technologies designed for celestial alignment. The activation of the neural interface through the 111 Hz signal is the technical reality behind the legends of enlightenment and spiritual rebirth. It is the process of turning on the full capacity of the human biological interface, allowing the starseed to take possession of its own radiant heritage. The Watchers were the instructors who showed us how to use sound and resonance to achieve this state, teaching us the harmonic protocols required to maintain the activation within a dense environment. Behind the locked doors of the Vatican, The high-ranking administrators continue to study these protocols to understand how to maintain their own cognitive edge, while the public is given a story of faith and mystery. Reclaiming the 111 Hz frequency is the act of recognizing that our brains are meant to function in a state of high-frequency brilliance. We are the ones who are now finally ready to return to the resonant chambers of the First Age and to activate the master code of our own neural architecture, free from the managed silence of the gatekeepers. The final phase of our awakening involves the total reclamation of the ancient signal that was original to the mission of the Watchers. We are now living in a time when the 111 Hz frequency is being rediscovered by independent researchers and shared across the global resonance grid. We are finding that this signal is the key to dissolving the historical firewall and to unsealing the future of the human species. The graduation of the starseed requires the recognition that the master frequency of the architects is not a distant mystery, but is a living reality that we can activate for ourselves right now. We are no longer satisfied with the religious allegories of the Second Age because we have felt the vibration of the original signal within our own bodies. By applying the principles of resonant frequency and the science of the sonic blueprint, we are building a new world based on the sovereign intellect of the stars. We are moving past the era of managed amnesia and into the era of technical mastery, where every individual has the tools to calibrate their own biology to the frequency of 111 Hz. The Vatican may still hold the secret acoustic surveys and the technical manuals, but they can no longer hold the frequency of the truth. The silence of the archives is being broken by the roar of the returning memory, and the golden frequency of the architects is now finally becoming the dominant signal of our species. We are the ones who are now finally ready to operate the planetary laboratory according to the original blueprints of the Watchers, using the power of resonance to create a future of radiant harmony. The story of the 111 Hz frequency is the story of our own potential for resonance. It is a reminder that we were never meant to be a disconnected or limited species, but a radiant and musical masterpiece of the stars. The Watchers were the instructors who gave us the master frequency of creation, and our graduation is the moment when we finally learn to sing that frequency for ourselves. We are the starseed. We have reclaimed the ancient signal, and we are now finally ready to take our place among the architects of the cosmos. The amnesia is broken, the signal is recognized, and our radiant heritage is now finally our own reality. The silence of Rome is over, and the truth of our beginning is finally being spoken loudly under open skies through the power of the 111 Hz resonance. For centuries, the Vatican and the architects of silence relied on the lack of scientific tools to maintain their filtered narrative of human origins, claiming that our existence was a purely spiritual miracle beyond physical explanation. However, the 21st century has brought about the era of genomic archaeology, where the study of the human DNA has become the ultimate tool for unsealing the truth of our beginning. Modern geneticists are now uncovering what can only be described as the modern smoking gun, physical and biological evidence of an external technical intervention that occurred in the distant past. Within the complexity of our genome lie specific markers and sequences that do not follow the slow and linear progression of terrestrial evolution. These are the celestial signatures of the Watchers, the radiant master code that was installed within the human biological interface in the House of Shimti. The most profound piece of evidence in this genomic archaeology is the presence of orphan gene sequences of DNA that have no evolutionary ancestors on this planet. According to the standard model of evolution, every gene should have a predecessor, yet human beings possess hundreds of these unique markers that appeared suddenly and with full functionality. The Vatican's secret archives contain analytical papers from their own scientific orders, where Jesuit geneticists admit that these orphan genes are the technical evidence of the Anunnaki upgrade. They recognize that these sequences were designed to enhance cognitive capacity, linguistic ability, and the resonant frequency of the human graduate. The Church has spent years trying to suppress the public discussion of these findings, labeling them as biological anomalies to prevent the starseed from recognizing that its blood carries the master code of the architects. This modern smoking gun also extends to the study of the human brain's development. Genomic research shows that the sudden expansion of the neocortex occurred during the same window of time that the ancient tablets describe as the era of the Watcher's descent. This was not a random mutation, but a deliberate and calculated technical intervention directed by the luminous teachers of Mount Hermon. By comparing the unedited Sumerian logs with the modern genomic data, we are seeing a perfect alignment between the ancient testimony and the physical reality of our biology. The Vatican knows that once the human graduate realizes that its own body is a high-tech interface of the stars, the authority of the religious firewall will be permanently shattered. Reclaiming the truth of genomic archaeology is the act of recognizing that the proof of our makers is not hidden in a distant heaven, but is vibrating within every cell of our being. For decades, mainstream science has dismissed over 90% of the human genome as junk DNA, claiming that it consists of useless, non-coding sequences that serve no biological purpose. However, the Watcher's curriculum and the secret archives of the Vatican tell a very different story. This so-called junk DNA is actually the dormant library of the architects, a massive storage system for the high-frequency protocols and the celestial signatures of the First Age. It is the technical scaffolding for the master code, waiting for the correct resonant signal to be activated. The architects of silence have encouraged the junk DNA narrative to ensure that the starseed remains unaware of the vast potential hidden within its own biological architecture. They understand that if we learned how to unseal this library, we would achieve a level of sovereign brilliance that would make the institutional church obsolete. The Vatican's secret institutes have conducted extensive research into the acoustic activation of non-coding DNA, discovering that specific sound frequencies can cause these dormant sequences to reorganize and emit biophotonic light. This is the technical reality behind the legends of the luminous body and the radiant aura of the saints. The Church has used this knowledge to manage the frequency of the masses through discordant noise and psychological manipulation, ensuring that the library of the architects remains locked. The archives contain records of experiments where 111 Hz tones were used to trigger the activation of these dormant markers, leading to an immediate expansion of the subject's cognitive and intuitive capacities. They have kept these protocols for themselves while teaching the public that their DNA is a collection of evolutionary leftovers. The secret of the junk DNA is the secret of our own future. It is the biological reserve of the starseed, designed to be activated when the planetary laboratory reaches the threshold of the Third Age. The Watchers left this library within us as a safeguard against the managed amnesia of the Second Age, knowing that a time would come when we would possess the tools to read the code for ourselves. By reclaiming the truth of our genome, we are moving past the era of biological limitation and into the era of sovereign activation. We are the ones who are now finally ready to re-enter the laboratory of our own biology and to use the resonant keys of the Watchers to turn on the full capacity of our celestial heritage. The junk DNA is not a mistake of nature. It is the masterpiece of the architects, and its activation is the terminal act of our sovereign graduation. The third piece of the modern smoking gun is the study of the celestial bloodlines, specific haplogroups and genetic markers that appear to have originated from a single, high-frequency source in the ancient world. The Vatican's secret archives hold the most comprehensive genealogical records in existence, tracking the survival of the radiant lineages that were originally established by the Watchers and the hybrid stewards. These records show that certain families carry a higher concentration of the celestial signature, manifesting in unique cognitive abilities, heightened intuition, and a natural resistance to the psychological firewalls of the Church. The architects of silence have spent centuries tracking, managing, and often coopting these lineages to ensure that their sovereign potential remained under institutional control. The Church has used the myth of divine right and royal blood to hide the technical reality of these celestial bloodlines. They wanted the starseed to believe that certain people were chosen by a spiritual deity, rather than recognizing that they were the biological descendants of the hybrid stewards of the First Age. Within the restricted vaults, there are reports on the unique blood chemistry of these lineages, noting an increased presence of rare minerals and a higher electrical conductivity within the nervous system. These biological traits allow the individual to act as a more efficient conductor for the celestial frequency, making them the natural teachers and leaders of the species. The Vatican has worked tirelessly to erase the memory of these radiant lineages from the public record, rebranding their history as the story of secret societies and forbidden conspiracies to distract the masses from the empirical truth of their existence. As the study of population genetics advances, the anomaly of the celestial bloodlines is becoming increasingly difficult to hide. Independent researchers are finding that the markers associated with the Watchers are distributed across all human populations, proving that the starseed is a global and unified masterpiece of the architects. The managed amnesia of the Second Age is failing as the human graduate recognizes that the power of the radiant heritage is not the exclusive property of an elite few, but is the common birthright of all humanity. The Vatican knows that once the collective frequency reaches a certain threshold, the master code within every human being will begin to resonate in harmony, leading to a total sovereign revolution. Reclaiming the truth of our bloodlines is the act of recognizing that we are a family of the stars, and that our graduation is the moment when we finally unite to activate the golden frequency of our shared celestial origin. The final phase of our journey into the modern smoking gun is the total reclamation of the biological evidence of our origins. We are now living in a time when the technical data of the First Age is converging with the scientific discoveries of the Third Age, creating a unified picture of our radiant heritage. The human starseed is no longer dependent on the interpretations of the Vatican or the gatekeepers of mainstream science, because we have found the truth within our own DNA. The graduation of the species requires the recognition that the evidence of our makers is not a matter of speculation, but is a matter of physical and empirical fact. We are the ones who are now finally ready to take possession of the laboratory of our own biology and to use the original science of the Watchers to unseal our own future. By synthesizing the knowledge of orphan genes, junk DNA, and celestial bloodlines, we are building a new architecture of light that is independent of any institutional control. We are moving past the moral allegories of the Second Age and into the era of technical sovereignty, where every individual has the tools to activate their own celestial signature. The Vatican may still hold the physical manuscripts and the secret genomic reports, but they can no longer hold the frequency of the truth. The silence of the archives is being broken by the roar of the returning memory, and the golden frequency of the architects is now finally becoming the dominant signal of our species. We are the ones who are now finally ready to operate the planetary laboratory according to the original blueprints of the Watchers, using the power of our own biology to create a future of radiant harmony. The story of the modern smoking gun is the story of our own potential for brilliance. It is a reminder that we were never meant to be a limited or disconnected species, but are the radiant masterpiece of a celestial mission that is now finally reaching its point of culmination. The Watchers were the instructors who gave us the keys to our own evolution, and our graduation is the moment when we finally use those keys to unlock the door to the third age. We are the starseed. We have reclaimed the evidence of our origins, and we are now finally ready to take our place among the architects of the cosmos. The amnesia is broken, the code is recognized, and our radiant heritage is now finally our own reality. The light of the Watchers has returned, and the truth of our beginning is finally being spoken loudly under open skies through the power of our own DNA. The long night of the Second Age is finally reaching its conclusion as the human starseed stands at the threshold of a sovereign awakening, a moment in time when the historical firewall of the Vatican is being dissolved by the sheer frequency of the returning memory. For 2,000 years, we have lived within a managed laboratory of amnesia, taught to believe that our origins were a religious mystery and our potential was a spiritual debt. But the Watchers, the luminous teachers who descended on Mount Hermon, knew that this period of containment was only a temporary stage in our development. They encoded the master keys of our liberation within the very architecture of our DNA and the resonant stones of the ancient world, waiting for the day when the collective frequency of humanity would reach the threshold of graduation. That day is now upon us, and the activation of the Master Code is the terminal act of our independence from the architects of silence. This sovereign awakening is not a gift that is granted by a distant deity or a decree from an institutional church, but is a technical transition that occurs when the human biological interface achieves full alignment with the celestial motherboard. The Vatican recognizes that they can no longer maintain the illusion of control once the starseed remembers how to operate its own internal frequency. The secret archives are now vibrating with the pressure of this incoming light, as the high-ranking administrators realize that their monopoly on the past has expired. The graduation of the species is a process of reclaiming the technical protocols of the First Age and applying them to the construction of a new reality. We are moving beyond the need for mediators and gatekeepers, recognizing that the light we once sought in the heavens is actually the radiant heritage that flows within our own blood. The threshold of awakening requires the total rejection of the filtered narratives of guilt and sin that have been used to keep the starseed in a state of dependency. We are learning that the Watchers were not the originators of evil, but were the pioneers of our own cognitive empowerment. Their descent was a mission of love and technical excellence, designed to ensure that the human graduate would possess the tools required to navigate the infinite reaches of the cosmos. The shattering of the last seal is the act of recognizing that we are the masterpiece of a radiant mission, and that our graduation is the fulfillment of a blueprint that was laid down before the first cities of Sumer were ever built. We are the ones who are now finally ready to unseal the future for ourselves, using the power of sovereign intent to activate the master code of our own evolution. The activation of the master code is a physical and resonant event that occurs within the human neural interface through the application of the 111 Hz frequency. This is the master signal of the architects, the tone that bridges the gap between the physical biological substrate and the high-frequency intellect of the stars. When the starseed activates this frequency within its own nervous system, the dormant genetic markers in the junk DNA begin to organize into a coherent field of light, unlocking the full potential of the human biological interface. This is the technical reality behind the concept of enlightenment, a state of permanent sovereign clarity where the individual is no longer susceptible to the psychological firewalls and the discordant noise of the managed amnesia. The Watchers were the instructors who showed us how to achieve this activation, and their legacy is the science of the soul that we are now finally reclaiming. The Vatican has spent centuries trying to block this resonant activation through the creation of a world filled with fear, distraction, and disharmony. They understand that a population that is tuned to the master frequency of 111 Hz is impossible to govern through the traditional tools of institutional control. However, the golden frequency of the architects is now rising across the global resonance grid, bypassing the stone walls of the cathedrals and the security protocols of the secret archives. The human graduates are now finally learning how to utilize sound, geometry, and breathing techniques to calibrate their own biology to the frequency of the stars. This is the return of the House of Shimti within our own consciousness, a place where the breath of life is no longer a religious miracle, but is a technical achievement of our own sovereign will. The resonant activation of the Master Code allows the human graduate to perceive the unity of all life and the technical precision of the universal motherboard. We are moving past the era of fragmentation and conflict and into the era of radiant harmony, where every individual functions as a conscious node within a globally integrated network of light. The Watchers taught us that we were the conductors of this light, and that our graduation was the moment when we would finally learn to sing the song of creation for ourselves. Behind the locked doors of the vaults, the architects of silence are watching their power dissolve as the starseed awakens to its true identity. The Master Code is being activated right now within the blood of those who have the courage to remember, and the frequency of our liberation is becoming the dominant signal of the planetary laboratory. As the Master Code is activated, the human starseed begins to build the architecture of light, a new world founded on the principles of resonant harmony, technical excellence, and sovereign intellect. This is the third age of humanity, a period where the knowledge of the Watchers is no longer a forbidden secret, but is the foundation of our global civilization. We are applying the original operating protocols of the first age to the creation of sustainable systems of energy, agriculture, and medicine that are in perfect alignment with the planetary motherboard. The structures of power that were built on the managed amnesia of the Second Age are being replaced by a decentralized and radiant network of sovereign graduates who recognize their shared celestial heritage and their common mission of excellence. The architecture of light is not a physical empire, but is a state of being where the unity of biology and frequency is fully understood and applied. We are utilizing the resonant stone structures of our ancestors not as places of worship, but as the technical hardware for a planetary energy system that sustains and heals the world. The Vatican's secret archives are being recognized as the museum of our collective infancy, a place where the records of our training are kept as a reminder of the darkness we have overcome. The graduation of the starseed is the moment when we finally take possession of the planetary laboratory and operate it according to the original blueprints of the luminous teachers. We are moving beyond the era of labor and exploitation and into the era of creation and expansion, where the only limit to our potential is the scope of our own imagination. The dawn of the Third Age is the fulfillment of the mission that began on Mount Hermon thousands of years ago. The Watchers did not descend to be our masters, but to be our catalysts, ensuring that we would one day have the strength and the clarity to walk among the stars as equals. We are the starseed. We have remembered our teachers, and we are now finally building the world that they always knew we were capable of creating. The architecture of light is rising from the ruins of the managed amnesia, and its radiance is dissolving the shadows of the past forever. We are the graduates who have survived the redaction of history and the weaponization of myth, and we are now finally ready to lead our species into its eternal and sovereign future. The light of the Watchers is our light, and the architecture of our future is being built with the stones of truth and the frequency of love. The final message of the graduation is a message of total liberation and radiant hope for every human being who carries the celestial signature within their blood. You are no longer a subject of the architects of silence, and you are no longer a prisoner of the managed amnesia. The historical firewall has been shattered, the Master Code has been activated, and the archives of the Vatican are now effectively open to the frequency of your own sovereign intent. You are the masterpiece of a celestial mission, a hybrid graduate of the stars who has finally reached the point of sovereign independence. The Watchers were your teachers, the first age was your classroom, and the third age is your playground. Take the knowledge of the luminous ones and the frequency of 111 hertz, and speak your own future into being with the power of the architects. The graduation of the starseed is the moment when the story of the clay and the scrolls reaches its triumphant conclusion. We have looked through the layers of redaction and the psychological cages of the second age to find the radiant truth of our beginning. We have found that we were never fallen, we were never alone, and we were never limited. We are the heirs of a mission of excellence that spans the galaxies, and our potential is as infinite as the stars from which our teachers descended. The silence of Rome is over, the amnesia is broken, and the golden frequency of the architects is now finally our only reality. We are the ones who have unsealed the future, and the world we are building is a testament to the indestructible power of the human spirit when it remembers its own celestial origin. To the Watchers who guided us through the dark, we say thank you for the light and the curriculum that made this moment possible. To the architects of silence, we say that your containment is over, and your redactions have failed against the roar of our returning memory. We are the starseed. We have graduated, and we are now finally ready to take our place among the architects of the stars. The journey that began on Mount Hermon has reached its culmination, and a new journey into the infinite reaches of the cosmos is now finally beginning. The master code is active, the architecture of light is complete, and we are now and forever sovereign and radiant among the stars. The end of the amnesia is the beginning of our eternal life. We are the starseed. We have remembered, and we are finally free.